high school boys and girls are having a hop at the local soda fountain. Innocently, they dance. Innocent of a new and deadly menace lurking behind closed doors. Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell.
A lot has changed since the 1936 movie Reefer Madness. Many countries and 33 U.S. states have relaxed their marijuana laws. Uruguay and now Canada have legalized it entirely. The response from some quarters, positively giddy.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Thank you, yes indeed. Now that all the laws have changed, we all can grow some weed. Weeding is annoying, like it I do not. And why am I growing flowers when it's legal to grow pot?
All laughing aside, weed is big business. It's estimated that the global market could explode to $155 billion by 2026.
I think the basics of the amendment philosophy is that this is just any other business. So we're running every part of this business the way an agriculture company would run it, the way a production company would run it, the way a retail store would run it.
Entrepreneurs are plunging in.
Hi, it's me, Regina, with Leafly's Cannabis 101. You ask, we answer.
But there are concerns that women and minorities are being pushed out of cannabis production and the wide array of related industries that are popping up.
With over 4,000 dispensaries in the U.S. and Canada, WikiLeaf shows you where the nearest dispensaries are located, along with what strains are currently in stock.
Legalization is also unleashing a new wave of scientific research into the medical uses of cannabis, its possible risks, and its upsides.
Side effects may include euphoria, increased appetite, uncontrollable giggles, elevated sensitivity to musical dopeness, and reduced anxiety. Tetrahydrocannabinol may also induce feelings of existential well-being and relentless optimism.
Please welcome Amanda Daly, Yoheem Helms, and session moderator Christine Boyden.
All right, are you guys ready for a little fun? So while it seems like it's going to be quite a gear shift after Carmen Best, how amazing was she? Holy thing. I think so much about what she talked about in terms of establishing legitimacy and trust and holistic ecosystems actually very much relates to this panel. So, true. So thank you for this timely conversation, panelists, as well as I think Canada is the perfect place to have this conversation. I also think it's important to acknowledge that one of our panelists had to drop out at the very last minute because Border Patrol said no to her entrance. We're hoping it's not related, but otherwise, we're missing one who was a great expert on diversity and inclusion and activism in this space. So we're going to touch on those topics, but it's an area that deserves a lot of attention. All right, you ready to go?
Yes.
Very ready. All right. So before the session, we posed a few questions about cannabis on the conference app. So let's take a look at the poll results, and hopefully you ladies told the truth. Have you smoked marijuana or used a product containing THC or CBD? All right. Not so bad. I wasn't so sure. Yoa, let's start with you. Is this what you expected from this room?
Looks good for business, I would say.
Amanda?
It looks pretty honest, although you might say, who did it but didn't inhale? But with that boosted, I'm not sure, but looks pretty honest.
All right. Well, if you answered yes, we asked also, how often? Daily, weekly, or infrequently? Let's see what the results say. Okay. Weekly is up there. Is that about right?
That looks about right,
Yeah,
I think.
it actually does.
Yes.
I think
All
we have an
right.
honest group here.
And we also asked if you use these products, do you use them for medicinal or recreation? Let's see.
And it would have been interesting to ask who uses it for both, because I bet you that category would be large as well.
I think you're probably right. All right. Well, thank you for the participation. We're going to have a couple more live polls later, so keep your phones out. So this is an amazing time. I mean, even 5 years ago, I would not have thought that we would be on the stage having this conversation. Amanda, you came from Pfizer.
I did.
Tell us how your life has changed and what made you make the leap into this new world.
Sure, and to say, Christine, that 5 years ago you wouldn't have envisioned being here. 6 years ago I wouldn't have envisioned making the leap to the cannabis sector. In fact, my colleagues at Pfizer, where I spent more than a decade, would definitely have voted me least likely to be working in a cannabis company at the time. And what happened about 6 years ago was an alignment of my personal and professional stars, I'll call it. My family was complete. I had been back from a maternity leave for not a long time and had decided it was time to shift my career into high gear. And part of that was knowing that the traditional pharmaceutical sector, which treated me so well for 15 years, but was shrinking, was leaving me a chance to put my hand up, to leave and to do something different. So what happened when Pfizer was restructuring in 2014, I waved the flag and said, you know what, I'm ready for change. And the career stars aligned because at the same time, the cannabis sector in Canada was changing. It had been legal for medical purposes since 2001. But what was happening was patients needed more access. And at the time, they only had two choices, grow their own or purchase from just one company who had just one product available. And so someone in the medical community told me about this. And I laughed it off and said, marijuana? Seriously, you think this is something that I could do? And they explained that the rules were changing and that the healthcare community would very much feel uneducated and unprepared to understand how they could provide better access to their patients. So I did some research, and I was working in the field of pain and medical education and learned that the active compounds in cannabis, the cannabinoids, can actually play a role in pain management and, of course, other symptom management as well. And I just got the bug. I got so excited for the opportunity, and that's how I made the leap, was take a chance, and it's been a wild ride.
I think that's fascinating. Yoa,
Yeah.
the Netherlands have been blazing this trail for a very long time.
Yes.
And you're offering a lot of expertise to the rest of the world as they're grappling with the implications here.
Yeah.
What are some of the aspects that you're consulting on, advising, warning people against about the good and the bad?
Well, let's first start with the Netherlands because that's
Sure.
where it all started. But I have a quick question for the audience. Who thinks in Holland weed is legal? Maybe raise your hand if you think it's legal. Okay. A well-informed audience, that's good. Weed is not legal in Holland. Back in the 80s, the government made the decision to decriminalize cannabis. And by doing that, they enabled the cannabis consumers to go to a coffee shop, as you probably know the Amsterdam coffee shops, and people could go there and get their information and smoke it even at the coffee shop in a safe place. And this system proved to be pretty successful. So weed has not been legal in the Netherlands, unfortunately, but now that it is in Canada, your second part of the question, a lot of Dutch people are came to Canada also to consult in growing because, it's a big relief. They could not do it legally back in the Netherlands. So money is not really an issue in Canada because companies are listed and can pick up a lot of money along the way. But good genetics, for example, comes a lot from Holland because we've been doing it for a long time, and knowledge about growing. Yeah.
So what do you think the impact of that experience and that tolerance and acceptance has had on the rest of society or alcohol consumption or anything else?
Well, like I said, the system was pretty successful, especially from a public health point of view. So what they did, the government realized, or the people realized that it's better to separate the market of drugs. So in Holland, we spoke about soft drugs, being cannabis and hashish, and hard drugs, cocaine, heroin, etc. And by separating the market and providing the people a safe place to get their cannabis, you avoid, especially young people, to go to an illegal dealer and get their weed, but because the illegal dealer often also has other drugs. By avoiding that, a lot less people get addicted to hard drugs, and the numbers that show that. So we have very low numbers of hard drug addicts in the Netherlands still, and the average age of addicts is very high. It's above 40 years old. So that's a big success.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think those are some big lessons to take away. Amanda, have you been looking at places like the Netherlands to help inform how Canada is rolling this out? And are there other areas that you're taking those lessons learned, good and bad?
Sure, I would say it's a great question. And has Canada looked around the world? Absolutely. To the Netherlands, stateside as well, when we were looking at not only expansion of the medical system, but of course more recently with the full legalization for recreational purposes. And I guess it's similar. What I hear Yoa explaining is one of the goals in Canada was also to restrict youth access. I would say the first goal of the Canadian system was to remove the criminal element. And by that, it comes with federal regulations. And to distinguish from Yoa's explanation, it means controlling the production, so the growing practices, the testing, the distribution, and the sale. And so by doing that, you have a level playing field and a good, safe, regulated environment. And number two goal for Canada, for sure, was also restricting youth access by creating this legal adult access program.
Interesting. Yoa, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Do you want to riff on the point regarding the Netherlands not being able to grow and regulate in the same way as Canada and other places?
Yeah. So the Dutch system has good sides, what I just explained, to having places where people can go and, where it's safe and they can get their information. On the other hand, what they left out to organize for a long time, they did this 40 years ago, by the way, and all this time they never organized the production of cannabis, which is pretty strange, of course. So we call that the backdoor problem. So everything within a coffee shop is tolerated, not legal, but tolerated. Under certain rules, you can have some cannabis, and we are allowed to sell it. But behind the back door, where the production is, and the transport, and the packaging, and the testing, most importantly, that's all illegal, which creates a very awkward situation, of course, because the whole point of now of us, also in the Netherlands, we're lobbying for 25 years to get it legalized, because you want the product tested, just like a glass of beer or a glass of water, which has a label and it says exactly what's inside. In water it's not so interesting, but in beer you see alcohol percentage, etc. And you want all those cannabis consumers, and we saw that it's quite a lot of people. According to United Nations figures, it's 180 million worldwide, and they have the right to know what they smoke, and that's very important.
Yeah, I think it's one of the critical issues facing us. So, as promised, we have another question for the audience, so get out your phones. Open the app, the IWF conference app. Go to this session, which is cleverly named Canada-bis. Scroll down to live polls, and the question is simple. Do you support wider legalization of marijuana for recreational use? Yes or no? So while the voting is taking place, Amanda, did Canada legalize for the same reasons as so many other places? Was it tax revenue? Was it just fun? Was it anything in between? Or was it more focused on maybe medicinal?
So that's a great question. And while I would say fun and tax revenue are definitely a piece of it, for sure primary drivers were removing the criminal element and really ensuring that everything from seed to sale would be regulated and overseen with stringent supervision. And again, on the youth side, I would say those were the two drivers. You do hear, of course, a lot about the tax revenue and whatnot, but I would say absolutely not the drivers. And I would say as well, this is evidenced by Canada really taking a federal approach and really having such stringent regulations in place.
That's great. All right, poll results. Are we ready?
Oh, very progressive.
Holy smokes.
I love it. This is great.
Does that feel about right in terms of the Netherlands?
Yeah,
home
also
country?
in the Netherlands, where we're still fighting to get it legalized, it's really a pleasure to come to Canada, where it's legal and to do business just normal. In the Netherlands, we also see that most people want to have it legalized. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, this does feel like a bit of the gold rush. And I think what's interesting is that there is a risk of too much production potentially, or maybe too little. Where is that balance going to take us in terms of the way that we think that the market opens up? Let's take Canada first.
Sure. You do hear questions about that. There are so many companies in the sector now, so much production going on. So it is a good question, and you do hear it sometimes referred to as the green rush. Mm-hmm. And what I will say about Canada is this is early days. When you think that it's only been legalized in Canada for recreational use for just over 1 year, we're still in our infancy of this program. And so whether it's companies like ours on the commercial side of the business or the provinces who are purchasing cannabis for retailing, it's still early days to know where that equilibrium will net out in terms of demand. And I'll share a fun fact that will paint this even better. So stateside, Christine, I understand you're from California.
Yes.
I have severe envy this time of year especially.
No snow.
No snow, I would take it, maybe a sprinkle at the holidays. But the number of retail stores per population in California, as I understand it, is 1 store for every 10,000 California residents. In our 2 most populous provinces, being Ontario, where we are today, and Quebec, respectively, they have 1 retail store for 595,000 people and 1 retail store for 495,000 people. Wow. So it's very tough and very early to say that there's a risk of overproduction when the market is still in such infancy. So what Canopy Growth, my employer, is doing is really building an ambitious infrastructure and sales and commercial team to be able to ready ourselves for what's coming. And in Canada, we have right now, to contrast again from California, very limited product types available. Cannabis flowers, cannabis oil, cannabis soft gels. But very recently, we announced what many in Canada call Cannabis 2.0, which is other formats. So topical formats are coming, vaporizing or vape pens are coming. So there are new formats that we've not yet launched, and very excitingly for my friends who have never consumed, beverages are coming. So again, with all of these formats opening up, it's early days to say that production is too much.
Got it. This is a question that we're disappointed our other panelist isn't here to answer, but I'm going to pose it anyway because I was chatting yesterday with the head of the ACLU from Georgia, Andrea, and we talked about this gold rush, green rush, but that white men are flocking into the industry like never before because the money that is going in, at the same time with that backdrop of so many people of color still being incarcerated for it, and the social justice and racial justice implications thereof. Could you speak about how your organizations are thinking about that and or trying to help address some of those really challenging dualities and dynamics in the market?
Sure, and actually, Christine, it is something that we do talk about at Canopy Growth. So you mentioned social justice issues and incarceration. As I understand it, the statistic in the United States is that African Americans are about 4 times more likely to be incarcerated for cannabis-related charges than Caucasians, despite the consumption rates being the same. And when FBI data has been looked at from a number of states, they found similar trends. So it is astonishing. And it's something that as a company, and a global company operating in 5 continents, we do feel compelled to ensure that we have an eye to social justice and also to ensuring balance and representation in the communities that we employ and in which we operate. And one way that we are taking this on is by working with a group here in Canada called the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, and also by working with people with lived experience so that we can learn what we don't know about this topic and try and do better.
That's great. Yoa, could you tell us a little bit about your experience or your thoughts on that in terms of how you're seeing organizations in Europe address racism or sexism in the industry?
Yeah. Well, we are a very small company still. We are from the Netherlands, and we've always worked with within our company with a lot of women and people from all backgrounds actually, and we see that over all the years actually working with cannabis. It's kind of in the culture of cannabis, you know, and I think a lot of really big companies misinterpret that and sometimes don't get it right, the cannabis culture. So for me, this whole corporate industry is relatively new. You know, I've been working in this industry for so long, and the last 4 years have been the most dynamic of the whole industry. So a lot of things are changing, but and these things in America are new to me, of course, but I follow it very closely, and yeah, it's very important, of course. But I also think that if people look beyond the corporate industry and look at really the plant cannabis, what it means, it just doesn't fit the culture also.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about public policy and regulation and quality and all the rest. How do you see this in terms of its importance as we advance and grow the industry?
In terms of quality and consistency and the importance on that, in my mind, and maybe I'm biased because we're here in Canada, but to me that is the only way to progress. And when I look at, for example, the challenges in the United States and the market there, how it's state by state regulated, so companies are really restricted in providing a consistent, reliable, quality product that can be adopted in every state when there are state-by-state differences in rules and regulations. So I would say that the importance of quality and consistency is paramount as the market expands. And so hopefully, one day, like Canada, the United States will look at this on a federal level.
That's great.
Yeah, to add to that, I think the quality is actually the most important thing, especially at the moment. So after legalizing in Canada is the most clear example, actually. You see companies are collecting hundreds of millions of dollars, and some companies are worth billions even, and they can spend millions also. So they can give a celebrity like Snoop Dogg or somebody that we all know. They put his face on the packaging, and the packaging is looking really great nowadays. There's a lot of it around, and different packaging, especially in America, is looking really, really good. But the main thing is quality. If the quality of the product that goes into that packaging is not good, then the product is not going to sell. So quality above everything else is more important than money and etc.
And I think that's a really natural segue to move from some of the business of cannabis to the potential health benefits. And you know, my mother was of the generation who talked about reefer madness and is now, you know, in her late 70s and thinks that CBD is just the most powerful, positive thing that's happened in her life with some healthcare issues. Who knew? I would like to start with you, Amanda, especially since you came from a more traditional pharma world. Could we talk about some of the implications and where we are in terms of proving efficacy of cannabis, CBD, and beyond?
Awesome, absolutely. And I do want to roll it back to your mom, Christine, because it's no surprise to hear that your mom, and I bet you if we polled the audience, a lot of people's mothers and older relatives and friends and colleagues have also recently turned to cannabis and cannabinoids for medicinal properties. In Canada, the 65 plus age group is the fastest growing among consumers. So this is speaking to the fact that it is working for people. Do we need more research? Absolutely. At the same time, we often see headlines in the media like, void of evidence. There is no evidence for the medicinal use. And I want to contrast that with some facts, like the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine is a well-known, long-standing, and respected organization in the United States. And about 2 years ago, coming up on 2 years ago, they released a publication. It was a large undertaking. They looked at an independent arm's length from industry group looked at more than 10,000 papers, research studies on cannabis, and concluded that there was conclusive or substantial evidence for the use of cannabis in a variety of medical symptoms. Pain was one of them, spasticity was another. And so do we need more research? Absolutely we do. One of the barriers to research to date, and this is important to consider, is prohibition in and of itself has really been a barrier to countries and companies to be able to research it for medical purposes. And now that we're seeing the tides turn and many countries are legalizing for medical use, and here with recreational use, that tide will change. And so Canopy, for example, what we're doing is we have more than 50 studies that are planned and some of which underway in the field of pain, mood, and sleep to get those answers.
That's great. Yoa.
Yeah.
I think when we think of Amsterdam cafes and sort of that world, we think much more of the recreational.
Yeah.
Where are you going in terms of the medicinal?
Well, with our company, we've been trying to create awareness for the plant for a long time already. So in 2006, we started the documentary series, Strain Hunters, in which we went to far places like the high mountains of India and the jungle in Colombia to show what cannabis meant for the local community, not just recreational, but also for medical purposes and sometimes for their religion. But also on the medical side, we have a research department called GH Medical. We started that around 2006 also, where we look for possibilities to treat certain diseases with the different cannabinoids that are in cannabis, which the most famous is CBD, of course, but there's many others. And we do clinical trials in universities in Kinshasa and in Barcelona. And those clinical trials are super interesting for diseases like Parkinson and Alzheimer and many other diseases. And over the years, for me, also working with cannabis, not just recreational, but also seeing it like this, it really confirms for me the belief in cannabis.
No, it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Just for specificity, what do you think your business is in terms of breakdown these days, in terms of percentage of recreational versus medicinal oriented?
Well, in the Netherlands, we don't really sell for medical. There's one company in the Netherlands that has a license to grow legally, and they sell to pharmacies. So that's a different system. Nowadays, we're also in Canada, here in Ontario, and in America, but mainly focusing on recreational. And then we are also in Congo, in Africa. After one of the documentaries, the government asked us to stay to do more research on cannabinoids to treat malaria and AIDS and diseases like that. So there we do a lot of research. Yeah.
Related, Amanda, one of the questions that had come up when we were doing some of the research was the potential about addressing the opioid crisis with cannabinoids or other products that are related. Do you see hope for that?
I do. I'm very hopeful, and the company, Canopy Growth, is also very hopeful and doing something about it in terms of looking for research and looking for answers. And about 2 years ago, I guess it was June 2018, so a year and a half ago, we announced a $2.5 million investment into research with the University of British Columbia and the British Columbia Centre for Substance Use. to tackle this question head on. Because anecdotally, you do hear about people using cannabis to mitigate some of the risks of consumption of opioids. And so it's an important question to answer, because in that year that we made the $2.5 million commitment over a 2-year period was a year following a year where Canada had just over 4,000 deaths due to opioid overdose, and more than a third of them were in British Columbia. So Canopy Growth very much wants to see if we can find a way for cannabinoids to be part of that solution. And so through a Canopy Growth professor of cannabis science and an endowment fund, this research is taking place now. And I think it's next week or later this month, the first professor of cannabis science, Dr. M.J. Malloy from UBC, will be giving an update on this program and some timelines on when we can expect to hear some answers, because doing proper controlled trials or studies is really the best way to get these answers, and that's what he and UBC are taking on.
That's great. Well, I'd be remiss, after talking about so many of the positives, to not ask the question about, to either of you, research about potential harmful effects and what we're doing and what your organizations are doing to make sure that we're not creating other issues as we go into these other positive implications. Maybe Yoa first?
Well, that's a very wide. Well, let me narrow it down a little bit.
As much as
I think the key is information, no? To give information. I have 4 boys myself at home. Sorry, no women.
Just a little bit
only
busy.
the mother. And
you have 1,100 for the next couple days.
Well, in my case, it's very easy to see, because my boys are really not interested in weed, and probably because I'm giving seminars and we make movies about it and are in the picture. So it's nothing special. But nevertheless, we do speak about the risks, and because we live in Amsterdam, which is a great city, but there's a lot of things going on. And so you have to speak with them about it, and then more on a scientific level, well, you can have a whole different separate seminar about that, because it's very complex. Because of course, like Amanda said, a lot more research need to be done, and there's also cannabinoids, for example, that we know have an anti-schizophrenic effect. Mm-hmm. So it's very difficult to say, but we're definitely in the beginning stage of knowing more. Yeah.
Okay. Building on that, Amanda, the U.S. has been having some pretty awful situations with deaths related to vaping. Could you speak to that for this audience, for themselves, or those friends and families who are trying to grapple with what's legit there and what's not?
Sure, and you're right. I have been closely following along. Canada is poised to be launching and has recently approved the possibility for companies to sell these vape pen devices, we'll call them, or vaporizing devices. And this outbreak and the media attention it's garnered definitely underscores the need for federal regulations to provide public safety on the topic, and public safety, of course, for all the consumers. And so what are we hopeful that Canada will do differently? Well, we're hopeful that the federal regulation of these products will be helpful. And one thing we've done as global leaders, we definitely hold ourselves accountable to raise industry standards and be the ones where the spotlight shines brightest when you're the largest, and we want to do everything the best we can for the industry and to set a good path. So one of the things we've done has been, for our future vape products, we've worked exclusively with manufacturers who are what is called GMP certified, which is good manufacturing practices, something that's a known term and standard in the pharmaceutical world, to ensure that we're protecting against things like heavy metals, contaminants, and so on. And of course, very important, and in Canada with the federal regulations, to be regulating the content of the cannabis concentrate that's going into the cartridges that go in these devices. I would say as well, more research is needed, and what we're hopeful is that public health agencies will be the ones to take this on and own this from a balanced perspective. And again, federal regulations, we're very hopeful in Canada, will help us on this topic.
That's great. So as I think about this audience makeup, I think I also have to ask the question, despite your bias, most likely, should these women be investing in the cannabis industry?
Okay, well, this is not going to be investment advice. That's my little disclaimer.
Disclosures.
Yes, my disclosure has been made. I have a conflict, a large conflict of interest, of course. What I will say is it's an interesting space, it's an exciting space, it's a hot topic, it's a controversial topic. There are so many companies getting into the cannabis sector. And what I would say is to those of you interested from an investment perspective would be to look past the hype and really look for what is a company's long-term plan and vision. Are they setting themselves up for success locally, globally? What standards are they holding themselves to? And to choose companies that are poised to take advantage of opportunities, because as a sector, and I think I saw it on the video this morning, that the market, the potential market in a decade's time could be as high as $150 billion, what some analysts say. So it's undeniable that there will be disruption to the alcohol sector, to the pharmaceutical sector. So my bias is it is a place of investment opportunity. And I'm interested to hear what Yoa thinks.
Yoa, tell us.
Well, I would say yes, of course, but I wouldn't advise it to become a cannabis millionaire, what you sometimes hear nowadays, because the stock prices went up, and at the moment they're going down, so now I would wait or even invest now. I'm not a financial advisor, but I would invest in it in time and knowledge, because we're at the beginning of a very interesting journey. I mean, we've been on this path for a while, but we're exploring opportunities on the medical side, and even the plant is amazing. I mean, if you look at hemp, what's our biggest challenge now on this planet is to save the planet, no? So I think this plant can have an amazing impact on that.
I think that's all too true. So please join me in thanking Amanda Daly and Yoa Helms.
Thank you.